Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 and 2 discussion. That's right, we've got news for both games today, although this is primarily going to be about Path of Exile 1. So the first two pieces of news apply to both games equally, then all the rest of it is Path of Exile 1 exclusive. Today, Granny Gear Games have put out an announcement about a new appointment that they've made. Kelly is the new lead communications manager, and undoubtedly we'll get to know them over the next little while. But the key thing here that we know is that they're going to be working alongside Natalia, Blake, Eben, Matthew, Nick, Kiki, and Tom in the community and communications department there. And it's worth knowing that Natalia and Nick are people that, like, community members may have had interactions with in the past. While Bex, who used to run communications at Granny Gear Games, was on parental leave, Natalia took over for her. And then Nick is someone who's also been doing a number of things lately. But Kelly is going to be taking over there. And the key thing with this is that this means we're likely to see some changes in past practice. Even things that worked in the past can often get changed when someone new comes on, just because new people will want to do things a bit differently. So this is what's going on, and this might be part of the reason that we don't yet have a firm release date for Path of Exile 2's 050 patch. The other possibility, of course, is that Granny Gear Games might not have been willing to commit to a particular date yet. They might have had a couple of milestones that needed to be hit before they can say, right, we're setting it in for this date. All of that out of the way, a reveal will be coming very soon for Path of Exile 2, and we hope you're just as excited as we are. But we don't have any firm dates yet. The last thing we've got is what we said in a previous video, where Granny Gear Games said they are wanting to have the main live stream reveal late in April, but there's no confirmation of that so far. Right, so we're talking Path of Exile 2 at the moment. Let's go to the change that's been made for Path of Exile 2. Fun fact, exactly the same change has been made in Path of Exile 1, but in Path of Exile 1, it's just the first line in a big patch. So, Granny Gear Games added to asynchronous trade a very much demanded change. This was reasonably early on, and this is what I term the anti-landmine tech. Landmines were where you set up a stash tab where everything looked the same, and most of the items were priced reasonably. So it'd be 4 chaos, 4 chaos, 4 chaos, 4 chaos for a whole bunch of maps. And then there'd be another one thrown in there that was like, surprise, this one's 4 divines. And the fair market price on the item might have been 5 chaos at the time. Anyways, Granny Gear Games, based on player feedback around this, added a warning. And this says, this item's price differs from the one you originally traveled to this shop for. This warning would show up if you originally traveled to a shop for a 4 chaos item, and then you ended up clicking on something else. Now, this is like a smoke detector. The vast majority of the time that the smoke detector in my house goes off, it's because it disapproves of me overcooking a steak. However, it's one of those alarms that if it goes off 100 times, 99 of them are false alarms, but the other one is a very real alarm, then you're very glad to have it. And that's exactly what the anti-landmine tech is. This is a warning that you need to pay attention to every time it comes up, even though sometimes it will be you intentionally buying something that you knew was a different price. For example, I have a tab that is listed in my asynchronous trade that is called Maps Mixed Price. And what I'll do is every now and again that I've got a whole bunch of 8 mod originator maps, I will just go and dump a whole bunch of them into that tab, and I'll put them at an extraordinarily high price to start with, and then I'll just keep dropping them by 20%. Every time I run 6 or 8 maps, I'll exit, I'll drop the prices 20% on the ones that haven't sold. And what this means is I end up with a stash tab that is a full mixture of prices. Some maps will be 444 chaos. Other maps will be 20 chaos. And that's why I put a clear warning to the person that's coming there by saying that the tab name is mixed prices. That way they're on guard, they're looking around, and they're double checking the prices. But this gives them a final warning when they do want to go ahead. Anyways, there was something that was causing this not to work, and that has now been fixed. That's the first thing for Path of Exile 1, and it's also the only change that's been made in the patch for Path of Exile 2. After this, though, we have something I'm really happy to see. Changes to the Mirage Challenge League. Now, it's worth saying that the Mirage League is currently in a good state in Path of Exile 1. There are no bugs that are getting widespread complaints, except for some connection issues, especially with EU servers. There are no really bad bugs in terms of gameplay at the moment. The fact that Granny Gear Games are doing iteration on this in an environment where the Mirage League, probably more than 2/3 of all the hours that are going to be played in the Mirage League proper, have already been played. This is a really good sign that they're intending to keep this content around long term, which really probably shouldn't surprise people because this has been a really popular league. So, Mirage entrances, these can no longer generate in boss areas of the Haunted Mansion or Underground Sea maps. What I believe was happening here is that you would get one room that was very dense, and then there'd be nothing else. You wouldn't be able to exit that room. This was a really rare situation though. I think I've only ever seen it once or twice. Fixed a bug where mirages could spawn things in inaccessible areas. This, however, was much more common. This is one that came up in a few specific maps. I think it was Beach that I was having the most trouble with this in, which feels a bit strange when you think of Beach's topology, but this is one that was definitely coming up a lot there. Fixed a rare bug where Sirus could sometimes fail to phase transition, causing him to vanish. This is painful because this boss is like 3 divines ago now. I think this Sirus fight just hasn't really hit for me. So much of this league has been so good. Sirus as a character is fantastic, but Sirus as an opponent has been really, really disappointing. Anyways, not every boss can be a winner, and when it comes to bosses that players don't like very much, we got some more things down in this list because there's some very, very welcome changes there. Fix a bug where City Square map bosses were not fightable if only one of the bosses was caught in the Mirage. It's worth noting here that we've got changes to City Square, we've got changes to Haunted Mansion and Underground Sea. These are likely ones that Grinding Games have been able to find because the player base have been reporting them, because the player base have been running them. If you are running something, one of your maps that ends up just having something a bit weird with it, and you think, oh, that really doesn't feel right, if you want to bug report it, what you can do is type /bug in game. Grinding Games will then issue you a bug number. Now, that doesn't actually report the bug on its own. You then need to go over to GGG's forums and then go into the bug report section, type up a bit of a description, but also make sure that you include that bug number. The reason for that is that then means Grinding Games can recreate the exact instance you were playing in. And when they create the exact same instance, they can probably solve the problem. Whereas if they just know, oh, Haunted Mansion broke, that's not necessarily going to help them solve the problem. One of the things that's quite difficult is that most of the runs of off-meta maps, so the genuinely unpopular maps, most of the runs that take place over a league take place pretty early in that league because people aren't really repeating those maps very much. And that means that players aren't necessarily aware of what the expected behavior is, and they don't necessarily pick up a bug. So for instance, if Primordial blocks, if there was some bug with the boss there and the Mirages, then most of the Primordial blocks that were run would have been run in the first week when players hadn't yet worked out expectations for how Mirages would work. So if you do run any of those maps, then it will be useful if you find something that works a bit wrong to make one of those bug reports. General improvements. These are improvements. Sometimes they'll have the general improvement section and it'll be tiny little tweaks, but these are some big ones. Variants of Sirus that appear outside the eye of the storm, such as in maps or the feared fight, they're no longer going to create walls when using the projectile barrage skill. Instead, Sirus will track the player while using this skill. So there is another boss that is very closely based on Sirus. I think it's called the Neglected Flame. It's one of the bosses that is a mini boss leading to one of the incarnations. Anyways, that particular boss has this tracking version of the projectile barrage skill instead. Now, this is something that just felt fundamentally unfair when you encountered the walls effect while you were fighting certain other bosses. And probably most notably here was actually the Synthete Nightmare. The Synthete Nightmare was absolutely brutal because the Synthete Nightmare has abilities that basically the player has to run away from at any cost, and your directions of movement were being blocked off by this projectile barrage skill. Sometimes you would actually be in the process of running away from something, and this projectile barrage skill would then hem you in. So that's now being fixed. Sirus will, however, have the ability to track the player while using this skill, so it's not a strict nerf to Sirus. It's mostly a nerf, but there are elements that are not easier than they used to be. Lower the minimum time the Infinite Hunger will spend underground while burrowing to 3 seconds down from 10. Now, there is no notification in-game as to how long this is, and that's why this fight was always the infinite disappointment. 3 seconds instead of 10 is a big improvement on this, as this was just something that felt like it dragged every time it happened. Updated descriptions on maps slightly to clarify that map items can be used on areas of that item's tier or lower. So this is just the game clarifying one of the rules it already enforces. Just explaining a little bit better that if you want to open a haunted mansion at all, you need to have a pretty high tier map to do it. Valgraph's support. This is one of the new exceptional supports, and it's one of the ones that replicates one of the graft abilities from 327. So this is the one that causes you to disgorge a whole bunch of hands around you, and the number of hands that you've currently got active is now going to be visible. Dead specters, which follow you as a wisp, they can no longer be hit by enemy projectiles. I think this was causing problems with chaining, but I just have a general rule of thumb. Specters are such a miserable mechanic to interact with that builds that require them I just generally don't play, so I don't know very much about the way specters work. Added a secondary tier to the Curator of Wisdom armor set and Traveling Wisdom back attachment that have persistent visual effects. So this is just an MTX change. After this, we have the section on bug fixes. Now, this is a mixed bag. Some of these are big, some of them are small, but let's go through them all because there's not a huge amount of them. Firstly, Incarnation bosses. Once you have done the quest ones, memory tears are intended to only spawn in tier 16 maps. The previous behavior was that they were spawning in tier 1 to 15. Now they're only going to spawn in 16. Fix a bug where death zones summoned by Sirus's apparition. These could be taunted by player war cries, making them more aggressive than intended at following players. Now this is one of those things that players won't necessarily realize is a bug. They'll just think, gee, Sirus feels really hard on my Warcry build. I'm not sure why. Well, this is the answer. When you were taunting some of those void zones, they would actually take that as a taunt rather than just being immune, as you might expect. Fixed a rare bug in the Sirus fight where a death zone could be created by the apparition while the player was inside a meteor maze. Again, that's probably not something you want to see happen very often. Divine Blast is a retaliation skill, and it wasn't working properly with Monastery Bell. This is now working. So Monastery Bell is a unique weapon that is designed primarily for use alongside retaliation shield skills, and that's now getting the interaction that it's meant to have. Fix the bug where reduced recovery of leech could also prevent recovery from other sources such as flasks and regeneration. I'm not exactly sure how that was coming up because that's not something I had personally noticed, but that's a very serious one. Next up, we have a volatile Varlorb change. This is actually a very small change in the fact that what they're actually doing is not changing the functionality of volatile Varlorbs on Calm's Binding, but changing the fact that the game was lying to you and telling you that Calm's Binding could be volatile Varlorb usefully when it couldn't. However, there is an important balance thing that underpins this, and that is that the game's uniques were designed around the assumption that they could only be divined within certain limits, and volatile Varlorbs allowing you to break that can end up being a very, very dangerous thing indeed. There are certain unique items, not a huge number, but certain ones that just become explosively powerful if they're able to scale beyond their normal limits. And one of the things that happens when you've got an option that is explosively powerful, it tends to then end up warping the game around it because players start using that, it becomes the assumption, and any endgame content that's designed to be challenging to those players has to be pretty much inaccessible or even completely impossible without the broken interaction. So, Graniger Games made a decision. Calm's Binding is just not going to work with volatile Varlorbs. They weren't communicating that to players. The patch note is that they are now communicating that to players, but the key thing is that they are making these balanced decisions. This item is immune to volatile Varlorbs, this item is not immune to it, and those decisions are going to change whether or not items are worth using or not. Fix the display bug when previewing volatile Varlorb outcomes for negative values. Now, this is something in Path of Exile 2 in particular. Volatile Varlorbs, what they do in Path of Exile 1 is a baseline effect of the Varlorb in Path of Exile 2. And one of the things that's been noticed by players in Path of Exile 2 is that Varlorbs do weird things on items with negative numbers in them. And sometimes it's not exactly clear to the player what's positive and what's negative, because sometimes we look at a number and say, oh, that is positive 20% reduced. Whereas Graniger Games look at it and go, oh, that's negative 20% increased. Anyways, hopefully this is something that they can get exactly right. It is really interesting to just preview a volatile Varlorb on an item that might have minus 20 to plus 20 to a certain stat as its roll range, and just see what the range actually ends up being. Fix the bug with Taunt. Taunt was not doing what it's meant to do. Enemies were dealing 1% less damage. It was intended they deal 10% less damage. Champion, this is a buff for you. Champion is now basically going to have 10% more effective hit points, at least if they're taunting things as often as they're kind of expected to. Fix a bug where spiders from the unique Strange Barrel Strongbox could sometimes become permanently undamageable. It's one of those things that's really tilting when it goes off. It's not very common, but if you're playing with a Strongbox Atlas, it will be very much a welcome change, even though you've probably gotten to the point that you mostly ignore Strange Barrels by now. Fix a bug where various fire, cold, and lightning damage modifiers were unable to be swapped for their counterparts when using the new Change Modifier Harvest crafts. Fun fact, these crafts are incredible. Play around with them. These are the ones that require Crystallized Rancor to use, so you can only get them by doing Reflected Harvest, but they're really, really good. Fix a bug with an MTX of Voidbane Shield. This was not working properly. Fix a bug where the Paladin weapon effect did not work correctly when applied to the Lich's Gaze Shield microtransaction. So this is something we've gone from some big changes like improving the way that the Infinite Hunger works, big changes like fixing Sirus, and then we've gone with a no longer available for sale MTX and fixing its interaction with exactly one specific MTX shield. Fix a client crash that could occur with the Gull in PvP areas, fixed 2 other client crashes, and fixed an instance crash. So hopefully a bunch of crash fixes there. Maybe that will improve things for me a bit because I've been having a lot of technical issues with the game in the last couple of weeks. But even if that fails, this is a good patch for a couple of reasons. Most importantly, it's the fact that they're still iterating on the Mirage Challenge League. This really does indicate they're intending to keep this content around in some form. Secondly, the anti-landmine fix is very important for just trade integrity in the game. And thirdly, improving 2 of the worst bosses in the game, Sirus and the Infinite Hunger. All of this very welcome changes. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs and your volatile Varlorbs have interesting results.